Joining us on today's episode is Bert Siegel, licensed clinical social worker with Fairfield Psychological Associates, to share his expertise relating to co-parenting dynamics and strategies to support parents through challenging transitions. Welcome, Bert. We're so happy to have you here with us today.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So before we dive into the whole co-parenting world, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your background?
Well, I've been in outpatient private practice for over 30 years now, and I deal with children, adolescents, and adults. In fact, I probably see 3 to 83 these days.
Wow,
And,
that's a span.
Yes, it is, and have dealt with anxiety, depression, behavior problems, ADHD, those type of things.
Okay, wonderful. All right, well, let's just dive right in. Can you tell us or discuss with us a little bit of the importance of effective co-parenting and ensuring the well-being of children during a divorce or a separation?
So co-parenting implies shared responsibility.
Right.
And we're talking about two people sharing responsibility who obviously have not gotten along for some reason. And so cooperating in the interest of children can be very difficult,
Yeah.
and therein lies the challenge.
Right. And that's so sad because unfortunately the child is the one in the middle there, and so they want to please both of their parents because they love their parents.
Yes,
So-
it can be emotionally devastating to children. And I've seen, increased anxiety, depression. There are some statistics that say that children of divorce have, worse performance in school, greater chance of dropping out. Not significantly, because many children can handle it just fine. And sometimes after the initial shock and difficulty, they realize, okay, we can manage this. But that initial period when the children are informed and when the parents physically separate can be extremely difficult.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I actually came from a divorced family, so I vaguely recall those feelings. I remember when my mom sat us down to tell us that my parents were getting divorced. Because my sister started crying. I was really little, but my sister started crying. I didn't really even understand what she was talking about. I was like, okay. She said, I'll get you guys, if you stop crying, I'll give you some popcorn. And I was like, okay, popcorn. But there were certainly a lot of challenges that followed that lovely conversation.
Yes.
So what are some common challenges that co-parents face, and how do these challenges impact the children that are involved?
Well, when two people are in disagreement and sometimes competition, whether it's time with the children, it can create a lot of stress. And there's financial stress. Most often there's financial stress. You're talking about supporting two separate households on incomes that were previously supporting one household.
Right.
So, and in a situation of divorce, typically one of the couple has made the decision prior, and the person who has not been, quote, informed or caught off guard for whatever reason is way behind in catching up to managing this.
Yeah, that
And
makes
so there's sometimes anger, there's sometimes one parent wants retribution over the other or both ways, and it creates a lot of tension and pressure and stress, and that funnels down to the children most often. Very hard to not let that happen.
Yeah. And again, I think that just goes back to the children wanting to please their parents because they love both of their parents and they want them to be happy. Okay. How do you assess the current co-parenting dynamics between the parents that you work with? How do you get to know what's happening in their household, and just help them with their strategies?
Well, I meet with the children, obviously, and work with them, and they, in many ways, express some of the dynamics that are going on in the household, whether it's in their behavior at home at school, whether it's in talking with me, whether it's the drawings they do or the actions that they show in their play. There are many ways that you can get a sense of what's going on at home. The other things that become difficult is that each parent wants to talk negatively about the other and spend that time. And so we have to make clear you can't control anybody else. You can't change anybody else.
Right.
And it's very destructive to speak negatively about the other parent. So all you can do is your part. And so often parents will point the finger. yeah, but look what he's doing, look what she's doing.
Yeah.
And I repeat, all you can do is your side of it and your end of it. And your control ends with you. And hopefully both are realizing that speaking negatively about the other parent only hurts the child.
Yeah, it definitely does. And I guess maybe I should have started out with the first question I probably really should have asked you is when families are going through a separation or a divorce, do you recommend that they get the child into counseling, get themselves into counseling to help go through that transition? Because their family dynamic, everything is about to change.
Yes. I think that all children going through divorce at least should have a couple of sessions just to be evaluated. How are things going?
Yeah.
And often I can see children a few times and things are going smoothly. Call me when you need me, that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
I think it is important that they have a way to express themselves. Often they pick up very quickly when one parent's talking negatively about the other. It doesn't have to be in front of them. They hear conversations on the phone.
Yeah.
They are very intuitive. You would be amazed how intuitive even young children are and how they pick up on nuances.
Yeah.
And they overhear conversations and they know quite a bit that we don't think they know.
That's very, very true. We always think that they're not aware and that, but they're always aware. They always know what's going on. Do you ever have a situation where you are counseling both parents of a separated family?
Yes.
Does that ever happen?
Yes. Sometimes we can meet the three of us in the same room and sometimes we can't.
Okay.
It really just depends. The better parents get along with one another, separated parents or divorced parents get along with one another, the less specific we have to be and the less focused, so to speak. Same thing with a separation agreement or a divorce agreement. And I'm not a lawyer, but lawyers will tell you this. If you guys are getting along well and you can say, we will agree upon reasonable visitation, great.
Yeah.
But when there's more animosity and they're getting along less, you have to be very specific about what's okay and what's not okay, what time, what place, who does the switch, and maybe doing, for example, change of custody after school so that the parents don't even come in contact with one another.
Yeah. We do see that a lot here, actually.
Yes.
That's pretty typical.
Yes.
They switch and the other parent picks up at the end of the day. So, yeah, familiar with that. What are some key strategies that you emphasize when you're working with co-parents to help them improve their communication with each other and just kind of help them to figure out how to collaborate with each other? Because at the end of the day, they may not be together, but they've made this child or children, and so they're always going to be connected through that child.
Well, always is the right term because, in the old days, parents would say, well, I just have to get through this till the kids are 18. Nope. You got to get through this the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Because there are going to be graduations, there's going to be weddings, there's going to be grandchildren, there's going to be yearly events, and you're going to have to deal with this person forever, basically.
Right.
So I think asking the parents, are you doing what's best for you or are you doing what's best for the child?
Great
And
question.
we really have to think about that because often parents, again, either want to get back at the other or they want their fair share. And let's look at what the child wants versus what's convenient for you, what your desire is, or you wanting to teach a lesson to somebody who has wronged you.
Yeah. I had some friends once who unfortunately separated. They did end up getting divorced, but they did something I thought was so interesting that I, at the time, hadn't seen anybody do. They rented an apartment. The kids lived in the house, and the parents alternated who was in the house with them, and then they went to, whoever wasn't in the house went to the apartment, which they shared because
Sometimes we call that bird nesting. Yeah.
I never heard that.
I recently had a family who did that. So the children, and there were 3 children, and the parents moved in and out of the house every week.
Yes.
And you certainly get a sense of what that's like for children.
Yeah.
So
I bet.
typically these days, in separation divorce agreements, rarely do we see one parent with legal custody. Most typically shared legal custody, and we arrange parenting arrangements. We decide what they are. And not uncommon today is a week at a time.
Okay.
Some parents switch more often, some children, and I encourage them not to, because you can imagine how disruptive
moving
that
every
is
week.
for a person.
Yeah.
Oh, I left my socks over there. I left my history book back home.
Yeah.
All of those things.
Yeah.
So, yes, some people do have the children stay in the home and the parents move in and out. That can also be very difficult because, you're kind of, again, sharing the same living space with someone, not sharing it, but you're moving
Yeah.
in and out of, and you want to have your possessions and so forth. So that can be difficult. They did that for a while successfully and then separated into two different houses. And now the children are going a week at a time, and it's going okay. I
Yeah.
think after a while, like with anything we go through in life, any hardship, once you see, okay, I can handle this.
Yeah.
It's not as bad as I thought. And the children are very resilient as well. They're not just intuitive, they're also very resilient. And they can handle a lot more than we think, but it's still a very traumatic event and difficult for them.
Yeah, absolutely. What was the term you said? Bird nesting?
nesting,
Oh,
yeah,
I never
yeah.
heard that. I like that. Okay.
Yeah.
How do you address conflicts between co-parents, and what tools or techniques do you use to help them resolve disputes
Well,
peacefully?
yes, peacefully. There's the rub. I think that one of the oldest counseling techniques in the book is mirroring or reflective listening. People often misunderstand. So one parent says, I'm frustrated that I wasn't able to pick up the children from school on time. So you're telling me it's my fault? I didn't say it was your fault. So we say, what did you just hear? Just repeat back what you heard without placing blame. Because we have filters,
Yeah.
and we hear things and we make assumptions, and that causes a lot of conflicts.
Yeah.
So I think that's one is just make sure you heard what I said, and you're not building a value judgment or blame into that.
Right.
I also, another is just using I statements versus you statements. It's not you did this and you did that, but it makes me frustrated when I don't know if you packed the children's possessions in their backpack or
Got
something
it.
like that.
So then it's less accusatory.
Much so.
Yeah.
And the other thing, let me answer the other side of that coin is with the children. And I have a stock little paragraph that I tell children. That's this: your mom and dad disagree, okay? And if I like chocolate ice cream and I say that's the best, and you like vanilla, is that a fact or is that an opinion? Of course, it's an opinion. Okay, your mom and dad have very different opinions. You don't have to choose who's right and who's wrong. Your mom loves you, your dad loves you, they're always going to love you. You do not have to choose if you think dad's right or mom's right. You can stay out of it. And if they're old enough,
Great advice.
if mom ever says to you or dad says to you, tell your mother or tell your father this, you say, stop, please. I don't want to be in the middle.
Yeah.
Because I see that a lot. And tell your mother this, tell your father that. Please don't do that.
Yeah, that's
It's
really
not
good
good for the
advice.
children.
No, it's not. It definitely puts them in a position that they should not be in because it's not that's not their relationship with their mom and dad.
Exactly.
So, good advice. I like that. How about let's talk about boundaries and consistency in successful co-parenting arrangements. What are we talking about when we talk about boundaries?
Well, I think, as we said before, boundaries have to do with I can control me, but I can't control you.
Right.
So when we say to somebody else, you're going to do this or you have to do that, especially when we have an adversarial relationship, not a good situation to be in. The more parents can try to put their differences aside and work together, the more we don't have to worry about people overstepping boundaries and creating problems. And again, that takes some time. Once we've gotten used to that, as I said, one parent typically thinks of separation or divorce months, sometimes almost a year or more before they say, all right, this is what I think we need to do. And the other one needs a chance to kind of catch up and wrap their mind around this and what it's going to be like and what it's going to mean. Because it's going to be difficult for everybody.
Yeah.
And that's why people delay it. And that's why sometimes it gets worse. And, staying together for the children is not a good idea either.
Right.
So consistency, I think you mentioned, is really the foundation for parenting, because consistency creates predictability, and that builds trust, and that's the basis of any relationship. So consistency in visitation, consistency in parenting, consistency in limits. Now, I'm not going to have the exact same rules and limits and
I was just
and
going to ask
approach
you that.
as you are. Okay,
Yeah.
that's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
But as much as possible. So, for example, maybe we have a week on, a week off. Okay, there may be a wedding out of town, and I would like to have the children for the wedding, and I'll switch with you the next weekend, or something like that.
Okay.
And that's going to create some inconsistency. But as much as possible, here's our schedule. We stick to it, and we know what to expect. At school, children feel very safe. They come in, they know when the bell rings, they know when they go to this class,
Yeah.
they know when lunch, and they know when they're going home.
Right.
Very consistent, creates that sense of trust.
I hear you. I think the thing I hear the most often is that, well, at my house, I know my child does their homework. I have no idea what happens at the other house. And I get a lot of, these are the rules at our house. You have to do this, this, and this. There's chores, there's bedtime, there's homework, there's whatever. But at the other house, they're lackadaisical. And they kind of go with the flow and do whatever they want. What do you say to situations like that?
Yeah, it's very difficult. And again, I can't control what goes on at your house and vice versa. And let's say that the child acts up at my house and I set a limit, well, you can't have screens,
Yes.
for example. And they go to the other house and they allow screens. Well, I can only control my abode, okay? So we certainly can have parents try to work together and understand the importance of consistency, but there's going to be some inconsistency because individuals are different.
Okay. So you would recommend to the parent in that situation that even though you're saying, your child can't have screens right now because of X, Y, and Z, when that child then goes to the other parent's house, you have to let it go and not worry about whether or not they have access to a screen over there because it's not your house and it's not your rules. That's really what you're recommending.
Yes. However, ideally, the other house supports you.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, but
of course.
only if they, adamantly will not agree with that.
Okay, that
So
makes
there,
sense.
you often have exactly that dynamic. One parent feels, I, stick to the rules hard and fast, and the other parent says, you're way too strict and rigid, and I'm going to do what I want.
Yeah.
So it's hard to get people to come together sometimes.
Yeah, and I do hear that's the thing that I hear the most often is the differences of what's going on in each house, and they have different rules. This house they don't have to sit down and eat dinner together, and in this house we have to eat dinner together, and stuff like that. So,
Right.
yeah, that's probably where there's the most conflict once you've adjusted to your new norm, I would think. Okay, so how about assisting parents in navigating difficult conversations like introducing significant others or discussing sensitive topics with their children? How do we go about that?
Well, some separation or divorce agreements have something like this. If one of us has a significant other, it'll be a year before they're introduced to the children. It'll be 6 months, some kind of guideline.
Okay.
Certainly what we want to avoid is the children meeting someone who they think is a significant other, and it lasts a month or 3 months or 6 months.
Right.
And then meeting a series of potential significant others, so to speak. And I think each parent thinks sometimes there is an affair that happens, okay, an extramarital affair before the divorce, and the parent who is offended, so to speak, will say, I don't, want them to spend time with that person, and that creates, because a lot of emotions involved there.
Yeah, that would be difficult.
So I think any time there's disagreement, we have to have as tight a legal agreement as we can. And ideally, again, there's the ideal and there's the real. And I've seen parents do very well, I have to say. Maybe working in mediation with a mediator together to say, let's come up with our agreement, because if not, then I'm going to have my lawyer, you're going to have your lawyer, and every time one of us talks to the lawyer, it's going to be cha-ching, cha-ching. And that's
Yeah,
the way it goes.
it is.
Whereas with a mediator, we maintain control. It's less expensive, it's more reasonable, and there are some agreed upon guidelines.
That's good advice.
The other thing that I forgot to mention is let's say that my son comes to me and says, Dad, Mom did da 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 da. What you need to say is, you need to talk to your mother about that, and vice versa.
Yeah.
Because when I, as the father, go to the mother and say, well, the kids told me you did such and such, that's a dead end.
Yeah.
That's not going to work. So we need to, if the children are old enough, and there's not an age, but depends on their ability. And I tell kids this all the time. I say, well, because they'll tell me, my dad this and that. And sometimes we'll talk about that with dad in the room or mom in the room. And sometimes I'll say, how would it be for you to tell your dad that? Oh, no, my dad would get too mad. Sometimes I'll say, would you like me to talk to your dad about that with your permission? Yes, I do, or no, I don't.
Yeah.
And then we go from there. So they know what their choices are. So I say, you can complain to mom or you can complain to dad about the other person, but they can't control that. And I will help you or I will help you help yourself.
I mean, that's like going back to the old story of I asked mom and she said no, so now I'm going to go ask dad, but it's a whole nother level.
Yeah.
It's a whole new level of that game.
Absolutely.
Okay. How do you help parents manage their emotions and then also prioritize their children's needs during these challenging times of separation and divorce?
Well, if the parents' emotions are getting in the way, then hopefully they have their own therapist to talk to and manage that. And often they do. And we can point out how that influences the children and how that impacts them in a negative way. Sometimes parents will choose to change that, and sometimes they won't.
Yeah.
It's tough.
It is tough because it is an emotional situation for everybody involved. So sometimes I think it would be very difficult to manage your own emotions. I don't know. I can't imagine. Okay, so how about, can you give us some examples of some successful co-parenting arrangements that you have seen or you helped facilitate? And also, like, what made those arrangements successful?
Well, it's not mine to say there's not one good parenting arrangement, okay?
Yeah.
I think in the old days, there was a time where mothers got primary physical custody and fathers saw them every Wednesday and every other weekend.
Okay.
There are situations where one parent may either work out of town or moved out of town, and it has to be arranged. Probably the most common that I see these days is a week at a time. Okay. And switching through the school day. So, maybe I take them to school Monday morning and, the other parent picks them up Monday afternoon for the rest of the week or something like that. Mm-hmm. Again, I think that every family's individual, and we have to look at what's best for you and what works for you. And what works for the children best. I've seen parents say, well, I don't want to be without the kids, so every 3 days we're going to switch. And I say, every transition is stressful, and the fewer transitions, the better.
Right.
So older children, maybe 2 weeks, if there's equal parenting time. But you really have to look at the needs of the kids and see what's best for them, not the parents, and what they want or what they don't want to give up,
right,
so to speak.
Yeah.
And sometimes finances enter in this too. X amount of time with each parent is different child support and then other amounts of time.
Ah, got it. Okay. I wasn't thinking about the financial component of
Absolutely.
visitation
Yeah,
or
yeah.
custody.
Yeah.
So interesting. All right. So how do you incorporate the perspectives and the preferences of the children when you're working with the parents to develop these plans?
Well, similar to the fact that, how old do children have to be before they can be left alone at home? There's not an age. They just have to be responsible enough. Okay. So how old and at what point do you allow children to have some input or some say-so with custody or visitation arrangements? And the answer is we want them to express how they feel from any age.
Okay.
As soon as they can talk, we want them to tell us what they think and how they feel. And ideally, we're open to hearing that throughout their lifetime. That doesn't mean they're going to make the decisions. Okay. I have a case right now, an 8-year-old boy who would love to say, no, I'm not doing that. And we have to say, well, this is kind of how it's going to be. And the other thing I explain to kids is moms and dads will make those decisions. They're the adults. And when they can't agree, they have other people who help make those decisions. And sometimes those people are called lawyers, and sometimes there's a judge.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's a lawyer for the children, which is a guardian ad litem.
Yeah.
And they will talk to you, and they won't necessarily do what you want, but they will want to know what you think and how you feel. So I think it's always important to let the kids express openly how they feel and talk about it in an appropriate way. And we have to kind of explain to them at an age appropriate level what's going on and what they control and what they don't control.
Right, which is very difficult for younger children to really understand. I think when
Yes.
and teenagers, it's also difficult for them to understand because they're now trying to exert their own control. So that's a whole nother dynamic to the situation.
Yeah, and what they want is mom and dad to get back together.
Yeah.
That's what they want. I'll tell you the most amazing example of that. Several years ago, I had about a 10 or 11-year-old boy, and his parents had divorced probably 2 years before. Mother had already remarried. And he came into that session that day, and he was in tears. I said, "What's the matter?" "My dad just got engaged."
Oh.
And I said, "Okay, so what do you think about that?" He said, "That means mom and dad are not getting back together."
Oh.
I said, "Well, your mom's been married for a long time." He said, "I know, but I thought maybe they would get back together. But now that dad's engaged, it's not going to happen."
That just breaks your heart.
So I've seen many, many, many children, and almost all of them wish that mom and dad could get back together and we'd be one big happy family again.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, sad. What resources or support networks do you recommend to parents to help them strengthen their co-parenting?
Yeah, I think having family and friends is very important. I think parents who are having difficulty with the situation, it would be helpful to have their own individual therapist to talk through these things. I think sometimes just expressing it, just saying it out loud.
Makes you feel better.
Yes. But having the support of family and friends, although very important, you have to remember they're probably going to be biased. You know,
That's true.
So if there's been a big rift, if there's a lot of anger between mom and dad, people are probably going to line up on one side or the other,
Yes.
and they're going to say, yeah, they're terrible. They're going to agree with you on that, and that doesn't mean that you're right,
Yeah,
and it doesn't mean you're right 100% of the time.
yeah,
So I think while family and friends is having the support of those is very important, we don't want to lean on the kids for support, not even if they're teenagers, especially if they're teenagers, but having your own therapist can be very helpful.
yeah. That makes sense. Okay, so what do you do in a situation where one co-parent is resistant or completely uncooperative in the co-parenting process?
Well, again, we have to look at if one is renegade, completely uncooperative, then there has to be more legal control and a remedy sought in court, and that's usually what happens, and it gets difficult. And anytime you put things in the hand of a judge, not that the judge isn't perfectly capable, but they could make a decision that neither one of you is going to like.
Right.
And that's, often people believe things that may not necessarily be true. Oh, I'm going to go to court, I'm going to tell him what he did or what she did, and the judge is going to understand, and they're going to throw the book at him. Probably not,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, because it's also your perception of what happened, and I find many times that I listen to two sides of the story around all the time, and the truth is, I always say it's somewhere in the middle.
That's right.
Yep.
So
that makes sense, and if they take it outside of their own circle and give the control to somebody else to decide, it may not be what they
rolling
really
the
want to
dice.
hear. Yeah, it definitely is.
Yep.
What about a situation where I hear about this a lot too, when kids get older and say there's joint custody or primary custody with one parent or the other, and then the child gets older and wants to go and live with the other parent? Do you see that happen a lot?
Yes, I think that things change.
Yeah.
So again, in previous times, younger children were more likely to go with the mother,
Okay.
or courts were more likely to give custody with the mother. I think a lot more is understood now about the need for both parents and how
Right.
important that is. And as kids get older, things change.
Yeah.
And sometimes, again, somebody takes a job out of town, or the child is interested in one particular thing that maybe the mother or the father is more involved in, and they want to spend more time there. Or maybe just the proximity to school or to friends or things like that. So absolutely, times change, things change, circumstances change, and there needs to be some flexibility there. So yeah, as children get older into high school, they typically want more say-so, and that's probably reasonable to make some adjustments when necessary.
Yeah, but probably very difficult if,
Absolutely.
on whatever parent it is that they're saying they'd like to go live with the other parent, from what I could see.
Right.
All right. How about discussing the importance of flexibility and adaptability in co-parenting arrangements? I guess especially in situations where the circumstances may change over time, like we were just saying. I mean, you could be bringing another person into the situation. One child could want to live with one parent, and one child could want to live with the other. There could be so many things that could happen. So,
yes, and again, I think working together is so important, and sometimes that improves over time. Sometimes, as the circumstances have been dealt with, as the initial emotions have been eased, then it's easier to coordinate, to cooperate, and to adjust. And finding out what's the motivation behind the resistance. Is it money? Is it time with the children? Is it feeling like you're being cut out? And I think that in any relationship, if the relationship is strong, then that can be worked through.
Yeah.
Okay? So we want to foster good relationship with the mother and the father, and hopefully they can agree on some things, or at least make some concessions and have some trade-offs.
makes sense. So definitely requires a lot of flexibility. Well, I really thank you so much for joining us today and sharing all this expertise. I think that some main wrap-up points are, yes, you must be flexible. Mediation might be a good route. Try very hard to, come to your agreements together for the betterment of your new family situation. Try to be consistent. And it sounds to me like in today's world, there's a lot of 1 week at a time. Kids going from one house to the next. 1 week they're with mom, 1 week they're with dad. And that can be hard on the kids.
Very hard.
And so as the adults in that situation, you need to understand that it is hard on the kids. What you're asking them to do is difficult. So be mindful of that,
Very much
and do
so.
what you can to help them through that.
Yes.
So if our listeners are interested in getting a hold of your firm, we will have that information up on our website. Again, I thank you for joining us today. I thank all of our listeners for taking time to join us. Please give us feedback on our podcast. If you found value in today's episode, please subscribe, like, and share. And also, please visit our website at www.strelitzinternationalacademy.org for more information about this episode, as well as resources and tips. And please remember that it takes a whole community to build a strong foundation for our children to grow and develop. On behalf of SIA, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for your partnership.